Hey guys, Mr. Ridgway here for our next lesson, Notorious Northern Colonies and the Bumbling British. I apologize that I do not have my webcam working for this episode. It's literally just the fact that I'm trying to record off my home computer right now and I don't have a webcam installed on it yet. So, anyways, go ahead, get your warm-up done with Pear Deck, please. And the warm-up is on this next slide right here. So think back to a few weeks ago when you founded a colony out in space. You set up a government for your colony to work on its own, right? How do you believe your government would respond if the Earth suddenly demanded more control of your colony? So go ahead, slap down your response using Pear Deck again. And once you've done that, then you can go on with me to the rest of the lesson, and we will kind of carry on from there. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is we are trying to achieve something really specific today. So we're kind of revisiting the northern colonies, but we're going to also in kind of a way be doubling back, no pun intended, to something called the triangular trade. Now what this was is we're gonna be looking at the northern maritime economy. We'll talk about what that is, but we're also going to be analyzing that through something we call the double triangular trade, or the triangular trade, as it's also more commonly known. And then second, a little bit later for our mini lesson, we're going to be trying to explain the rise of colonial assemblies in the context of the British policy of salutary neglect. Okay, so let's jump into this double triangular trade. Okay, we have recently been examining the relationship between Africa, Europe, all the colonies in the Americas. And again, the philosophy behind it is mercantilism. Again, if you don't remember what mercantilism here is, I'll pop up, put a link in the chat to the video below where we explain how mercantilism works. It's really, really important. It's this whole idea that, Britain's going to treat the colonies like they're colonies. They're going to exploit the crap out of them. They exist just to, make money for them. And that's what they really care about, right, is money. It's the way that countries measure power. But what we're now that we've kind of understand, at least if you understand the philosophy of mercantilism, that it's all about the home country exploiting their colonies. Now we're going to actually look at the routes and the goods that are being passed between the various locations, so you can understand kind of like the how of it all. Now, one of these parts we've already actually explored, but we'll get to that here in a moment. So I need you to click right here, and it's going to have you go and download a map, and I'm going to pull it up on my own computer so you can see it here. And I'd like you to do a little prediction. So if you think you know what the triangular trade is, okay, you need to, first of all, go and make a copy of this on your own, okay? And that is because it will not allow you to move things around because this is my copy. What you're going to do then is you're going to click, drag, move arrows, okay, so that you are going to make your own prediction of what the triangular trade is. All that you have to do, okay, for right now, just to keep it simple, is you need to connect 3 locations with the 3 arrows, okay, and then you need to insert basically let me back up a little bit. So you need to then type, okay, so let's say I drag my arrow out here, right, and I say, okay, part of the triangular trade is America connecting out here to Europe. I don't know. Okay, again, this is a predictive exercise, right? You're just going to click here, and then you're going to type in what you think was being traded along this route. And then you're going to proceed to make and arrange the arrows so that it makes a triangle. And again, this is just a prediction of what you think the triangle trade might be, even if you've never heard of it before. All right? Now, ignore, you don't need to put pictures on this map. I know that if your directions say that, that's just an error that Microsoft PowerPoint needs to update itself with. I'd rather you just type keep it simple and just type the examples of the goods that you think were traded for right now. Okay? Anyways, once you've done that then, okay, again, don't worry about the images. Let's actually now take a moment and see what the arrows should look like and the products that were actually sent. And we're going to use this source right here, the first green button, to help us. Okay, so you can see here, as my thing opens up, this is what the actual triangle trade looks like. So we have manufactured products being sent from Europe, okay, down to Africa. For example, guns, also rum too. Okay, from there, they're going to use those to buy slaves. Remember the whole gun slave cycle thing, right? Coming back, around. And again, slaves, and we're just going to kind of, again, put a bracket here for all the Americas. And then slaves there are going to make what you could call, I think the easiest name for this is probably foodstuffs. I put agricultural products here, but it's really foodstuffs because it's food plus other stuff. Rice, tobacco, timber, molasses, sugar, etc., 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 etc. Right? So this is the triangle trade, and this is what you should pop open with on, and what you need to go and correct your map to look like. So if you need a moment, pause this video, go ahead and do that right now. Okay? From there, I'm going to actually close out of this, and now we're going to make things a little bit more complicated. There's actually many different triangle trades. And so we're going to add another triangle on top. And this is really to add the mercantilism layer to another kind of level of complexity for us. So I've got another source here, and all of a sudden stuff starts looking a lot more complicated. Okay, ignore the white arrows for right now because that was the first that was the first triangle we looked at. Okay, let's just talk about what's going on with the new one. Right? So again, a reminder, manufactured goods, slaves get transported to Africa, they make foodstuffs which gets transported back to Europe, right? Well, we now need to add in some things that we've learned over the past few weeks. And that is, for example, that we know that Europe manufactures goods that they're going to sell back to the colonies. And that's what this top yellow arrow is up here. Again, notice taking things like timber and then manufacturing it into furniture, right? But then there's also trade happening between North and South America. And this is because as the colonies, and I'm speaking of the colonies as in like the 13 colonies, start to get more assembled, if you will, and organized, they start to also become places where they can trade, for example, with the Caribbean and South America. So what do we have happening? Well, let's kind of break this down so it makes kind of logical sense, at least to the greatest degree that we can. All right, so if the colonies are making foodstuffs, right, which we would assume, things like tobacco, okay, or lumber or things like that, if you are living on an island in the Caribbean that is dominated by slavery, you're probably not making anything that is a practical, livable necessity. And that is because, again, the Caribbean is dominated by things like sugarcane growing and stuff like that. So like fishing, foodstuffs, all that's going to have to get sent down here to the Caribbean and to South America. On the other hand, though, okay, what are they going to send the colonies? Exactly that, sugar, and then molasses is a byproduct that is made from sugar, and it is incredibly necessary if you want to make something called rum, which was the drink of choice of most people at this time. Okay, so there you go. Now from there, again, notice molasses and sugar also then gets sent, okay, back to Europe. Not surprising, okay, because again, that's like all of their growing in the Caribbean and large parts of South America. And from there, then, okay, you kind of need to think, okay, well, how is Britain going to pay for this molasses and sugar? Well, they're going to pay with money because that's really all they have, as well as some manufactured goods. So it kind of starts to make sense as you think like, well, what does this particular region be able to offer the other ones? And this arrow starts to make a little bit more sense. If you want to know what credit is money. That's just another word that we have for money here. So if you want to think about it this way, again, they're dishing out money to here, they're paying for the foodstuffs that they need, or they're paying with molasses and sugar, and then all those agricultural products. So we have just multiple triangles of flow going on here, okay? You will need to learn this triangle trade and where things go. All right. Once you have done that and you have updated your map to look like this one, you may need to make some copies of those arrows. So just hit Control-C, Control-V to paste new arrows onto your slides. Okay. I want you to check out what that trade looks like in the context of the economy of the northern colonies. And that's right here. So if you click this button, there's a short reading, and then there's some questions that go in your notes that kind of go along with the maps as well that I'd like you to finish off. Okay, so that's that particular activity. If we go on here now, we have to talk about how the British are going to kind of begin to factor into this northern maritime economy, especially in terms of why it seems like a whole lot has not happened with Britain so far. And if we go back here, okay, explain the rise of colonial assemblies in the context of the British policy of salutary neglect. Well, the British have not really been around very much, and that's going to kind of change. All right. So how do economic systems affect people? And then how do events overseas affect societies elsewhere? Okay. So some of this will reflect on some of the readings that we've done recently, but you're going to start to notice we're starting to put together a pretty comprehensive picture of how the colonies are doing in relation to the home country. Okay. So the Northern Maritime Economy, what is, first of all, the maritime economy? That was in that reading that you did there at the end of your map activity. What is it? It's all the economy that has to do with the North, and mostly in the Northern colonies, it's starting to center itself around ports. Okay, so like Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, Boston, etc., etc., and these cities are, as much as I guess we should say that they are kind of what dominates the northern, economic experience, we have to also remember that most people are still living rural lives at this time. So it's kind of like these ports are like a connection back to Britain that's overseas. That all being said, though, okay, as things are getting concentrated on ports, they are starting to become increasingly influential and very, very powerful. And again, money is power is one of the few kind of iron rules of history. And you can start to see here that, like, for example, Philadelphia's population grows to 30,000 people by 1776, making it one of the largest cities in almost all the world at this time. Okay, it becomes a major exporting port for the northern colonies. Again, things like wheat, rum, wood, all, again, foodstuffs, right? And then this is kind of something that's particularly interesting, is that in 1750, around 40 merchants control 50% of the trade that is coming out of that one particular city. So there are a group of people, okay, and we'll talk about these merchants here in a second, that are very, very powerful, even though they may not necessarily be the people that are politically in charge, which kind of gives us a more kind of comprehensive picture of things. So what's life like? And this should kind of sum up some of the reading that you did at the end of your map activity. Well, number one, they're really, really active. Okay. If you've been to New York City ever, it's crazy chaotic. Imagine that just on kind of like a diet kind of scale, and you kind of get the picture of the 1700s in places like Philadelphia. Now, what do they actually look like? Like, how are they structured? Well, for the colonies, especially ones that are royally governed, okay, which by the 1700s is the vast majority of them. There's royal governors and assemblies who wield the most political power. Okay, so that would be this red kind of top of the triangle up here. So, for example, like they would appoint people in charge of the ports, in charge of collecting taxes. Being a tax collector at this time obviously is a very prestigious position because obviously you get to handle a lot of money. That being said, though, despite those people having political power, the people who really have the economic power are those handful of merchants, the people who really have the trade and supply, driving inside the colonies. From there, there were the majority of the population would be part of this kind of like artisan/middle class. And these are the easiest way to kind of remember this blue group. These are people who are going to have a trade skill. So the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, the mason. This is where actually a lot of last names tend to come from. Like a smith is somebody who makes something, right? A Fletcher, a booker, which is a bookmaker. You get the idea. The working poor on the bottom are then kind of the people who are basically working wages, but they are unskilled. So these would be people like indentured servants, dock workers, servants, prostitutes, etc., 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 etc. Not again, not things that would involve a skill that, for example, like a butcher or a baker would have to have on some kind of level. So taking a look at our social classes here, okay, again, royal governors, merchants, this kind of artisan middle class, then kind of a working poor class here on the bottom. How do you think that compares to those in the United States today? So draw it out for me, if you will, okay, using Pear Deck, and then I'd like you to label them for me. Just kind of do like a little comparison contrast between the northern colonies then and what you feel like our social classes are in the United States today. Okay. Now, let's dive into these colonial assemblies a little bit more here. Okay. Even though the colonies are technically run, and I'm speaking the colonies in terms of each individual state here. Okay, they are run by royal governors. The colonial assemblies are the people who have the real power in the colonies. Okay. And what are these things, these colonial assemblies? They're like small legislatures, okay? So, for example, Virginia, which you can see a picture of there, has the House of Burgesses. And in order to be part of these things, in almost every single state, for a colonial assembly, you had to be a white man of property. And that means you owned land. Now, how can we say that these people are the real power in the colonies? Well, because they very, very commonly would control the purse strings of the governor, meaning like how much the governor would get paid to do his work. And if you own somebody's pocketbook, that basically means that you own them, right? The thing is that despite, again, we should mention here, even though these colonial assemblies are kind of running the show, notice, again, not talking about Britain really at all here, except for the fact that it does have some royal governors that it will appoint. Colonial assemblies also have to deal with the, just sheer popular power, which are stuff like riots and mobs, which Americans, as we will soon see, are very, very good at doing. All right? And that then kind of leads us on to how this kind of fits in with Britain. Okay, so we can, if you look down here, okay, we have a picture of two kings, and that is George I and George II. Now, I bring them up because after King James and the whole Glorious Revolution debacle, basically, and if you remember the whole lesson that we saw there on the massive super colony, if you didn't do that one, it's okay. No big problem. Basically, the policy of these two kings towards the colonies over time is something that we call salutary neglect. Okay? And what is this thing? It means you let sleeping dogs lie. You leave the colonies to run themselves. And that is really the policy of the British for a good 50-something years. Now, why did George I and George II do this? Well, number one, they were brand spanking new on the throne. And again, this is because they had to get rid of, some kings, and also these guys are from Germany. They're not technically British, but whatever, details. And when they kind of take charge, they just kind of let the colonies do their own thing. So it's a period of like less stringent supervision. Is there some stuff in there like the Navigation Acts, which regulated, where ships were technically supposed to dock? Yeah, sure. And them taxing, goods? Yes. But the thing is that mostly who's actually running things in the colonies are those colonial assemblies. They're the ones who fill the vacuum, and they become really, like, in terms of like managing how actually things happen, they really become more powerful. Now, okay, let's take a moment here, and I will ask this question of you, but then I'll also kind of give you a predictor question. So the rise of colonial assemblies may have happened because of the British policy of salutary neglect. So knowing the part that many of these organizations will have a part to play in starting the American Revolution, who deserves the blame for creating them? The British Empire or the American colonists themselves? Why? go ahead and type your response on Pear Deck. But the thing that you should also understand about these colonial assemblies, and this is just a bit of background knowledge here, is that when the American Revolution starts out, there's all these structures that have now existed because the British haven't been there in terms of like the colonies starting to rebel, and that's going to be particularly helpful. So who are we blaming for creating them? The British Empire for not being there, or the American colonists for taking the initiative? And then just kind of tell me why. Before we end the mini lesson here, I'll also have you start to think, and again, just kind of to back up here, and I will go ahead and do so. Earlier for your warm-up question, I asked you this question right here. How would you believe if like with your space colony, if Earth all of a sudden suddenly demanded more control of your colony, and you've been running it yourself now for 50 odd something years? And this question right here is exactly what is going to happen with the American colonies. So you set up your government for your colony to work on its own, right? These colonial assemblies have been doing that in the colonies. And now all of a sudden, what's going to happen when salutary neglect goes away? And that is going to be a main driving question of the American Revolution. But I digress. Let's talk about how we're going to end the lesson, okay? We're going to now go back and do a little bit of thinky think on seeing if you can remember how the doubler triangular trade works. So I want you to return back to slide number 6, click the map again, and then think, like try it, see if you can do the entire doubler triangular trade without my help. So can you do it? How much? If you need to do go back like after, halfway through because you get lost and update it, that's fine. But this is a really good kind of retrieval practice where like you take something that we did 15, 20 minutes ago and then you try to recreate it in your mind as effectively as possible. Okay? And that's going to bring an end to this lesson. Other than that, please make sure that you're beginning to prep for your Unit 1 test / whatever format that's going to look like, I don't know, because that will be coming up here in the next couple lessons. I'll make sure that I send out a lot of information on it so that you're prepared and ready. And also, please be aware, for next block, I'd like you to have Chapter 1 of Honor and Slavery read. Okay, and again, that is linked inside of our Plus Stuff folder. So other than that, I will see you guys in the next lesson, and I hope you have a good morning, good day, or good evening, good night, wherever you are. Bye-bye.